So, hello everybody. Today we've having a chat with Kate Miles. How are you?
Hi, thank you for asking me along. Hi, Gary. Nice to see you.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate you coming on. I always say it to everybody, like, you don't have to. You're spending your own time talking to me, and I really, really do appreciate it because I know everybody's busy, and especially when you're self-employed.
Oh, absolutely. But I was particularly interested as a bit of a keen, perhaps probably not that skilled amateur decorator myself. So,
Yeah, let me just check out your wall in the background. Let's see what your cutting in's like. Um, But yeah, I see you're a mind and body reset coach, and we spoke just briefly before you come on, and we talked about self-employment, how it's a busy life. It really is. We do our work. We've got to wear different hats, and I reckon, and I've been guilty of it in the past, and even now sometimes where I'm really and truthfully not looking after myself. So you we talked about you can go into work believing you're kind of exercising because you've got a physical job, but you're not necessarily helping your mind and body, and also getting food
no,
on the run,
that's
not
right.
planning ahead and stuff. So
Exactly. That's it.
um
And you're just having to do so many different things, aren't you? And I've myself fallen into that trap. And originally working for me as an osteopath in a busy clinic, etc., but also doing admin at home and doing the accounts, all of those things. You've got to be expert in all of it, haven't you? And then if you're paying someone else to do it, you feel like you've got to be able to afford that. You don't feel you can necessarily justify doing that all the time. But if you take any time out for yourself, you feel like your business is at risk. So it is a very, very challenging balance.
yeah, definitely. Yeah, there's definitely, when you go on holiday or have a day off and you're perhaps, what, I'm going to do an admin day on a Friday, you got that little guilt because you're not actually earning, but the reality is you're probably running your business more
Yeah.
efficiently. um,
Yes. Rather than you doing your admin day on a Sunday and
yeah,
having no downtime for yourself or your family.
yeah.
Yeah.
So first of all, I should say, do you want to just say a bit more about yourself and what you do and how you help people?
Sure. Okay. Well, I still work in my clinic. I love doing that. It's nice to have that, but especially since the pandemic, you know how things changed for everyone. Then I've been doing more online. So I've got talking therapy qualifications, and I do something called sanamentology, which is a bit like hypnotherapy, but it's more guided visualization based, and it includes something called lucid dreaming. So, when we have a dream, it doesn't necessarily make that much sense to us, does it? But our mind is trying to work through some sort of knotty problem. But half the time, we don't sleep well enough or deeply enough to be able to sort that out ourselves. And so it's useful to be able to be put into that state by someone else. So I help people by sentimentology treatment, if you like, but also by coaching them on how to look after their health much better.
I'm going to have to get you back to do a session. That sounds.
Yes,
I've heard of
absolutely.
it
So there's lots
before,
of options there.
so yeah, very interested to know more. So yeah, with my painters and myself being a painter for 20 years, how can we look after ourselves a bit more? Our mind and our body, which we know, are
Exactly.
connected.
Well, do you know what? The biggest, simplest thing that any of us can do is drink enough water. Yeah. And that is something that most people are really bad at. And I know that tradesmen and women, they often drink lots of tea, etc., don't they?
Yeah.
Or maybe fizzy drinks, things like that. But water is so, so important. And our bodies are, there are different figures that you hear banded around, but we might be up to sort of 90 or so percent, that if there's such a huge amount of water within us, but we're not keeping that topped up, it's really problematic. And you can have headaches, you can feel ill, you can feel tired. I mean, I'm not that keen on the hot weather in the summer. Last summer I was drinking 6+ liters of water a day and still feeling dehydrated. But you might not be absorbing that much of it either. If you're stressed, your gut isn't working properly and you're not taking on board the water that you're swallowing. So we have to think about that a lot. So the big thing that anyone can do is drink a pint of water first thing in the morning because you've not been drinking all night.
Yeah.
And most of the things we drink, they deplete our water rather than then increase it. So tea, coffee, cokes, things like that, you know, they're diuretics.
Yeah.
They're not helping us as much. Yes, there's liquid in them, but they're not as good as that volume of water would be.
Yeah.
And you can make the water a bit more interesting if you want to. There's loads of water bottles around now with separate sections in. You can put fresh fruit or cucumber or whatever in it. So, or you can just put that in the water if you want to. There are lots of things that you can do that help. But this is a big, big thing. This is the thing that most people are doing wrong. So if
Is
you've
tap
got
water okay? Sorry to interrupt.
tap water's okay depending on where you live. It's going to vary, isn't it?
Mm.
Tap water's okay. If you've got one of those fridges that filters the water, they can be good. Then there's those Brita water filter type jugs, but I think that tastes a bit odd. That I do find that tastes a bit odd. So there's some chemicals in there that are possibly having an impact. And then there are these water softening systems that people might have in their house, and you've got to be a bit careful with that because you can't drink that water. But if you've got a separate tap for the normal water, that's okay. But if it's a combined tap, even though you turn it the other way for the drinking water, well, I can tell the difference. I can take it's still tainted with something. So be careful with that. But basically, tap water. I mean, at work, I drink tap water. Yeah, at home, I've got one of those fridges that I can get the water from. But make sure you've got some idea how much you're having. That's the thing. And if you're using an app like my, Fitness Power, whatever, you can log, can't you, how much water you have. That can be really useful, even if you do it for a bit. I would recommend, though, if people are going to increase their water intake, that they do it gradually.
Yeah.
If you suddenly increase to what you think you should have, and 2 litres is just one of those arbitrary figures, there is a very complicated formula that helps you work out how much you should be drinking for your age and your size, etc., etc. Yeah. So sometimes 3 or 4 litres might be better for someone if they are older and larger, But if you suddenly go from like you're having half a litre a day to having 3 litres a day, obviously you're going to be in the loo a lot. And when you're working at people's houses, I'm sure that's slightly awkward, isn't it? And maybe depending on the working circumstances, if you're working on site somewhere rather than in someone's house, or you're working in an empty place that's been gutted, you might not even have facilities, and it might discourage you from drinking.
I've been in plenty of those situations. Sure.
Increase it gradually, otherwise you'll offload so much of it and you'll feel like your belly's a water bath, etc., and you'll be wondering why this advice is considered to be good. But that's a great place to start. That really is.
So
and it's
start
not
off,
that difficult.
so say I might have, I'm guilty, I might have, I don't know, 2 pints, 2 to 3 pints a day, perhaps. So just up it to a couple of litres.
So 4 pints would be a rough equivalent of 2 litres.
Okay.
So if you started by working towards 4 pints, and then you can see how that makes a difference for you. And then if you want to, or if you've done this formula or whatever, you might feel that you want to up that a little bit further, especially in the summer,
What's your take on caffeine?
I'm concerned about it. I know that not everyone is. I'm concerned about it for several reasons. One is because it's a diuretic. So whilst you think you're taking on fluid, you're not getting as much of that as you want to. It's also, albeit a natural stimulant, it alters your energy levels. So as it gives you an energy hit, you get to a point where you get a slump. And then when you have that slump, that's where it's perhaps difficult, because you've got to pick yourself back up again with something, whether that is another cup of coffee, a Red Bull, which I think is even worse than coffee. And I can explain that, but or you're having a bar of chocolate, or you're having something. So in the end, you're having more and more not good stuff or slightly questionable stuff to perk you up to keep going through the day. Whereas if you weren't having the coffee and you were having slow burn energy foods and plenty of water, and you were looking after yourself better, then your energy levels would be more consistent through the day anyway.
Can can coffee and caffeine, I know it can elevate your heart rate.
Yeah,
Can that be confused with feeling anxious?
I think it probably could. So, for instance, I don't really drink it. I can't even cope with green tea. There's too much caffeine in green tea for me. If
Mm,
I order a peppermint tea somewhere and they give me a green tea by mistake, and I don't notice that until I've taken a sip, I'll get palpitations
mm,
and headaches and whatever. So, yes, so feeling anxious, if that's feeling a bit kind of fluttery and what have you,
yeah.
that could easily, yeah, be feeling very similar
And
to that coffee effect.
like I'm not saying it happens with me, but it does happen with me sometimes. So I'm looking at it from my point of view. And also, I don't drink loads, but there's been the days where you've like maybe had one too many coffees. And can you get a feeling like the next morning of like a hangover type slump because you've gone all night without your caffeine, of course, but you're almost craving it again on the
Yeah,
morning
and
when you're
let's
on out?
say it's also going to depend whether you've got sugar in that coffee, and all of
Mm.
those other things have an impact on it, or a very fancy coffee that's got marshmallows and is whatever with it. Yes, you can feel really grim in the morning because it's also, whilst it may be low grade, it's got dependency tendencies. Yeah, saying
Mm,
it's addictive might be a bit strong, but so you've gone cold turkey overnight, you're going to feel grim, and then the only thing that's getting you going is having that shot of coffee the next day. Anything we can't live without, apart from water and a sensible calorie intake, things that
mm.
we can't live without potentially can become a problem.
Yeah, it's a really interesting conversation. And when we started off, I didn't know, like I said, we
Yeah,
went
we
in
don't
to
know
have
where
a
it's going
chat,
to
but it's such
go.
an interesting conversation, and I'm sure many can relate. And even from my point of view, I'm seriously looking at just almost an experiment of not having coffee
Mm,
because I feel my gut's telling me that it's not doing me any
yeah.
harm, but it's not doing me any good. And I
No,
do get
no,
slumps
that's
in the
right. That
afternoon and
that
stuff.
certainly you might not want to be totally abstinent, but having less of it is often a good way forwards. And you might need to chart symptoms and things to see whether it seems to be causing anything. But of course, it's also important not to suddenly stop. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, it's not heroin. You don't have to stop straight away. You
Yeah.
don't have to go through withdrawal. It's much better, it's kinder on your system to cut back so that it's not so much of a shock. And if you are going to make a change like that and it's during your working week or what have you, you need to be able to cope, don't you? And you don't want to replace it with something else.
Yeah.
So let's say you're trying to have less coffee, but you're feeling awful because you've just stopped it. Are you going to start drinking Coke or eating chocolate or having Red Bull instead? It's no benefit, is it?
No.
And if you stop coffee and your energy crashes and you can get horrific headaches as a withdrawal, you really can,
Yeah.
then maybe you're taking tons of pills to try and cope with the headaches.
Yeah.
So again, that's just a different
Yeah.
bad. Yeah.
It's an interesting one,
Mm.
and I reckon, yeah, I'm certainly after our talk today just going to experiment. I don't have loads, four a day, maybe something like that,
Yeah.
but I tend to cram quite a few in as soon as I get up.
So it
Um,
might be that if you can replace one of them with a pint of water,
yeah,
that might be a way to start, mightn't it?
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Food wise, so
Mm,
you know, we were talking about sugars and
sure.
effect on your body and stuff like that. So I'd like to know a bit more. That'd be amazing.
Yeah, that's great. So sugar's a very interesting one, and I think it does so much more than most people realize. So much more detrimental stuff than most people realize. It's not just a question of whether you've got your own teeth and whether or not your belly's growing. You know, it also has an effect on your energy levels, kind of a bit like caffeine might, so that it amps that up and then it crashes, so you reach for more of it. But also it does have quite an impact on inflammation. Yeah.
Mm.
So it actively increases inflammation. Now, inflammation is a good thing. If you cut yourself, you want that to heal up. So you need the inflammatory process to occur. It's part of that healing process. And so whether that's an injury at work or whatever it is, you need that to heal up. But that's a short-term thing. But if you're having all that sugar all the time, then your body is always in an inflammatory state, and it's a more stressed state. And there's a definite link between inflammation and pain. Of course, we know that. If our knees, we fall over, we fall off a ladder, we bash our knee, it swells up, it hurts. We know that. But there's a definite link between inflammation and anxiety. So our mental state is affected by the amount of sugar we eat,
Oh, interesting.
which most people have no clue about.
Yeah.
And when we think about sugar, we mustn't just think about, granulated white stuff that we're sticking in our coffee or what's in our chocolate bar or whatever. What we also have to think about are that carbohydrates are really chemically built from sugar. So that sandwich you're having that you don't think has got any sugar in it, that bread is being broken down into sugar.
Yeah.
So there's lots of places where sugar's added, and then there's lots of foods that don't look like sugar and don't say sugar on the label, but break down into sugar.
So you could go to like say get some diesel and then get a meal deal at Shell, and you get a meal deal and you're like, oh, it's a chicken salad sandwich,
So
with a
you've
packet of
got yourself
crisps
a
with
chicken sandwich, a packet of crisps, and a bowl of chocolate, and a can of Red Bull or something.
yeah.
All of those things have got sugar in it, even that sandwich. And the crisps. Now, the crisps sometimes, you wouldn't imagine, would you? Crisps sometimes have got sugar actually added to them. But the potato is a carbohydrate that breaks down into sugar that increases your sugar in your system. It's not as bad as the bread, perhaps. And you do have to be I can't emphasize enough, you have to be so careful about just stopping stuff dead. All right. It's really important that you talk to someone about cutting things down sensibly or whether it's even right for you. But it's just useful to have that information that sugar in all its forms, including bread, pasta, and porridge and crisps and whatever, sugar in all its forms can make you more anxious.
That's so fascinating, isn't it? Because, as I've explained, we do a lot of chats and talk about anxiety and, it could be past traumas or mental problems. But it's just another angle, isn't it?
So really if you've got those things lurking in your life, if you like, you've got current stresses, you've got old stresses that can be hard to deal with even if we want to, and then you're adding sugar into the mix, it's just heightening their effect.
Yeah. And I should imagine like alcohol is an awful one I mean, we all know it, but in terms, and I'm not saying don't drink because, I like a pint, but, with the sugar.
There's a difference, isn't there, between the odd drink here and there and binging at the weekend or having a bottle of wine every night. There are different levels, and it also comes down to that individual. So I've had plenty of chronic illness in my own life that I've had to learn how to deal with because the help wasn't necessarily out there at that stage. I've learned a lot of it through my training, but I've learned a lot through self-research and experience and what have you. And so I can't get away with not looking after myself. But I see that as a good thing because actually we should all be doing that, shouldn't we? So I've got a low tolerance of poor self-care. My health will show that quite quickly. Other people don't realise. And again, if it's not sleeping well or it's anxiety or it's whatever, you don't necessarily link it, do you, without having that prior information?
No, you don't. And that's why it's so fascinating to talk to somebody like yourself, just to see, like, I know it's only one part of what you do, helping people, but it's a very interesting conversation. So, I know a lot of painters in my group would be like, come on, Kate, what can we do? We're busy, prepping, and we could talk for hours about what foods to have, what not to have. What would
And you've got
be,
to make it easy for yourself, haven't
yeah,
you? Yeah.
what would be a good start? Because even like mentioning pasta, you know, to my limited knowledge, like pasta, oh, that's quite healthy, chicken and pasta.
It's easy, isn't it? It's really
Yeah,
easy. So obviously there are alternatives. There are alternatives for everything. Yeah.
yeah,
So there is pasta that's made out of chickpeas or lentils or various things
yeah,
that don't that do the job of pasta. You have to be careful; they're easily overcooked, etc., in comparison with normal pasta. But there are alternatives. But again, I'm not talking about cutting it all out. I'm just talking about heightening your awareness, looking at where your main areas of problem are, and starting or just starting with what's palatable. So sometimes writing a food diary is useful, albeit a bit boring, or just having a general idea of what you tend to eat through the week, highlighting your main issues or highlighting what you feel you could cope with changing, and just change one thing. Just change
yeah.
one thing for a week
So I guess it's
and see
even
how that
like, you know,
goes.
if you packet of crisps a day,
Yeah,
you know, swap it for an apple or a banana or, you know.
exactly. Yeah. So I do monthly challenges in my group.
Mm.
How much anyone takes part is another matter, but I do a monthly challenge. And actually, we are doing tea and coffee at the moment, so that's fascinating, isn't it? How that's just meshed
Yeah,
up. But it might be related to pasta or whatever. It might be related to biscuits. It might be related to alcohol. But I then talk about why you might want to make those changes
yeah,
and what changes you could make. You know, so that you can have ideas. But if you're trying to eat more healthily, then sometimes batch cooking stuff when you are free can be really useful. And I love a homemade ready meal. So let's say you've cooked up um, a even if it's lasagna or whatever, you've cooked it, but you've cooked much more than you need. You've chopped it into portions, you've frozen it, and then when you get home, it's already made. You've just got to heat it up. And
yeah,
so it's easy to have a quick, healthy dinner if you've done a bit of organising and preparation.
yeah, definitely. No, it is fascinating. You know, just to have to open people's minds and even my mind, you know, today. And of course, I knew it a little bit, but not really connecting it, you know, in terms of what we eat and how we feel as a
Yeah,
person. And, you know, in especially, you know, a lot of my group, and that's what my aim is to help with anxieties and overwhelm and stress and all the rest of it. But yeah, just to imagine it could possibly be linked to food is
yeah,
just, you know, that could possibly be one of the main components for a lot of
that's
people.
it. So many people wouldn't actually need treatment for any of these things if they drank enough water, they got a decent amount of sleep, they ate well, and they exercised, and they did something relaxing on a regular basis. That would transform the nation's health.
And what's funny is when I've done bits of reading in the past and what you've prompted me to say something. So it all sounds so easy, doesn't it? You know, that's
But
five things you've
yeah,
listed. It's like how difficult can it be? But
but I know it's not.
processed
There
food
can
is
be, yeah,
specifically designed to be addictive, isn't it?
exactly. And so whether it's a sugar addiction or whether it's a convenience addiction or whatever it is, that is there. And we've got into our heads that we're too busy to cook, haven't we? But even if we just cook one day a week,
Yeah.
and we might cook several different things, if we cook one day a week and we then save that and we have homemade ready meals,
Mm.
then we can eat healthily and quickly without having to. And even if it's not something you can just stick in the microwave quickly, even if you get it out the freezer first thing in the morning when you're making some breakfast, let's hope you eat breakfast, but you get it out the freezer and it thaws out through the day, and then it's quick
Yeah.
to heat it up when you get home.
And it's also clever marketing as well, isn't it? So it's like treat yourself to a
Yeah,
pizza, treat yourself to a
you deserve it and
glass of
all this stuff.
wine,
Yeah,
but all you're doing really is a complete opposite to your body.
yeah.
um,
And our idea of a treat has changed, hasn't it? It's not something we do a few times a year or once a month or whatever. It might be something we're doing. Treat yourself to a takeaway 5 days a week. It's
Yeah.
and whilst you can make healthier choices with a takeaway, it is possible to choose carefully. It's still not something you want to do tons of.
No, it's true actually. When I was a kid, my parents were like, "Oh, we'll have a treat for we'll have a Chinese," but it was
It was
probably
very rare,
every
wasn't it?
2 months, maybe.
I'm
Very
sure we
rare.
probably had it less often than that even. Yeah, it was
Yeah,
a rare thing, not 3+ times a week.
yeah,
you know yes, so we're not looking after ourselves, we're not understanding why it's important. I think we're just not taught that. We're not
mm,
understanding why it's important. But if we think about how we look after our children, how we look after our animals, perhaps how we look after elderly parents, but even if we just think about our animals, we make sure if we've got a dog, they get exercise, don't they? So
yeah,
we get exercise, that's good, but we're only getting the exercise because the dog needs us to take them.
yeah,
But we don't think about how we need it. And we make sure they've got water and we make sure they've got the right food, and we're not necessarily giving them all the rubbish snacks that we have.
yeah,
So when looking after them, we know it's important for them. We look after our cars, don't we? Mostly we take our cars for a service when they're meant to go. We maybe
mm.
have our eyes checked regularly. We know about these things, but somehow, somewhere in the midst of time, looking after ourselves got lost.
Well, I guess, and I'm not a conspiracy guy, but the pharmaceuticals wouldn't be very happy if we looked after ourselves.
Well, that's right, and that's a whole other conversation
Yeah.
we could
Um,
meander off into. But yes, so we could make a big difference to our health by caring for ourselves. So what I do is I teach people to look after themselves better, but I also give them treatment to help with all that build up of the emotional clutter that comes with
yeah,
living. Yeah, and so you can get better by looking after yourself scrupulously well,
yeah,
or you can get better by having the treatment to clear the clutter and looking after yourself a bit better, but not necessarily having to do it quite so well, because that build up of stuff that's also causing you more and more anxiety has been at least diffused to an extent.
yeah.
So
It's
yeah,
interesting,
it's
isn't it?
it's
So,
it's whether you want to do it all by scrupulously looking after yourself, or whether you want it to be a little bit easier and have some one-to-one or in a group help with
yeah,
someone, whether we're calling it therapy, treatment, or whatever we want to call it, to strip away some of those things that have built up.
and that's important as well. Like
Mm.
you perfectly describe it as mind-body reset. So if your mind's not kind of reset, you're gonna reach for comfort foods and stuff to
Yeah.
make you feel better,
And
and it's a
you
vicious
may,
circle, isn't it?
yeah, you may not think you deserve to give yourself the time to do these things properly, but I had eczema from babyhood, and I had a phase, probably a 10-year plus phase, that was horrific, and there was really not, and it was all over my face, etc., and there was not really any help that was being offered to me in conventional. There were awful medications and various things, but actually when it's on your face, etc., they don't have any creams they can give you. So I was just left to it, and I had to work out what to do. And I did scrupulously look after myself, and I tried lots of different treatments and things. But this sedimentology approach, which I hadn't heard of before, and I happened to, how did I happen upon it? I'm not necessarily even entirely sure, but I sat with it for some while, because it's almost a bit scary to hope that something might work when you're in such a terrible situation. But I
Mm,
was desperate. I could barely move. I was so ill. I went and had that done, and it changed my life,
yeah,
literally, probably even overnight. And whilst I needed more than that, that first session made a big difference. And that wouldn't necessarily be the same for everyone. It depends how much work they'd done beforehand, how open to it they were. I threw myself fully into it, and it made such a difference. And yes, I carried on needing to do the self-care, but I didn't necessarily have to be quite as careful as I used to have to. And I still was doing far better, you know.
mm,
So it stripped away that emotional clutter that had built up through my life.
yeah,
Some little things, some very big things, but it stripped that away.
Yeah.
and my skin started to heal in a way it never had. And if I really thought about it, the only times it had been really, really good were when I was really happy. And
Mm,
how often are we super happy
yeah.
all the time? But you've got to live, haven't you? And there are stresses, and you need to know how to deal with those. But if you've got sort of a backlog of stress that's built up, then it's easier to deal with the new stuff as well. You've got more
Yeah.
space and energy to deal with it.
It's funny you should say that, because I done some training in old pain to go, and it's about getting rid of physical pain and
Mm.
stuff, and the mind body connection. And just to share with you my story very briefly. So, and this is why I fully believe in you and everything we talk about. So I'd watch my son play football, and I
Hmm.
would always have lower back pain when I
Yeah.
watched him. I always had a bit of a back problem, but more so than ever watching him. And I'd walk around, and it's I thought I was, because I'm standing still in the cold. Um, but we've done a bit of work, and it was just brought about from anxiety when I was a kid playing. Feeling like a bit of pressure to do well.
Hmm.
I wasn't a bad footballer, and just a few other bits and bobs. And we basically cleared it in the sense of, right. So when I look, watch my son, the smells, the sounds, everything, it kind of brought it all back. But we've done a little bit of work, and it was like, well, you're not actually playing anymore, Gary, are you? You're just standing there having a jolly, having a coffee, chatting to the other parents. And from that day, I still get a slight, back problem because of it, because of some past stuff, but my back pain reduced
Yeah.
massively. And
Which
it
is
just,
great, isn't it? It's really fascinating. I mean, what's left, there could be a little bit of mechanical stuff. Thinking
yeah,
as an osteopath again, there could be a
yeah,
bit of mechanical stuff going on. But when I am being an osteopath and then I'm struggling to make the change I want to with someone, mostly I know that that's because there's a build-up of stress-related things
yeah,
that that osteopathy, although it's good, and cranial osteopathy particularly, it
yeah,
can't handle that. And that's why I started doing other things, because what I found was if I asked patients of mine if they would consider going to see a counsellor or something, because I felt perhaps some of their pain was stress related, they said, well, I don't want to do that. I know you, I like you, I'll talk to you, I'm happy talking to you, I'd rather stick with you. So I needed to
yeah,
increase my scope as a practitioner
yeah,
to
brilliant.
help them. And
Yeah,
I'm glad I did that.
excellent. I don't know if you've got time, but just a last quick topic, if you don't
Yes,
mind,
of
in
course.
terms of exercise. And we're in a physical job.
Sure.
um, Sometimes we might believe we actually don't need to exercise because we're working physically all day
Yeah,
long.
absolutely.
What's your take on it?
Yeah, that's right. So there are various facets with exercise. So it's partly muscle strength. So you're probably doing a reasonable amount of some of that with all the up and down ladders and reaching and those sorts of things that you're doing. But you're not necessarily targeting specific muscles. And there are some muscles in the body that are stronger than others and they can overpower. So for instance, we spend so much time, don't we, staring at our phones, etc., looking at our computers, and we tend to get hunched. And these shoulder muscles here at the front are much stronger than the ones between the shoulder blades. So if we exercise those weaker muscles, especially certain ones, and then we can encourage our shoulders to be back and down better, held in a better position by specifically targeting exercising those muscles. So anyone who's starting to get a bit of a hunch,
Yeah,
there are certain muscles they definitely need to work. Also, decorating is not necessarily cardiovascular.
yeah,
So we're not necessarily training our heart and lungs.
yeah,
So even if you don't feel you need to lift weights, you may need to do some form of cardio exercise, even if it's a high intensity interval version or what have you. You might need to do that. But the other thing that exercise is good for is our mental health. And the best way that we can exercise for our mental health is to do exercise that we enjoy. And as much as I love doing a bit of decorating here and there, if I was doing it all day, every day, it probably wouldn't be such a pleasure anymore.
yeah,
So if you're doing your job for exercise, you've probably lost some love in that somewhere. So you're not having the best time of your life like you might be at a
yeah,
party whilst you're doing that.
yeah,
Plus, being out in a natural, what we might call nourishing environment is much better.
Yeah.
So if you're walking outside, but in a built up area where there's traffic and this sort of thing, the air quality is not that great, is it? There's lots of noise, there's lots of distractions and what have you. You might be listening to music. If I go for a walk in a natural area that I'm lucky enough to have near where I live, where there's sort of meadow and woodland and such like, I'm not listening to anything.
Mm.
I'm just walking, breathing, being,
Yeah.
and the calming effect of doing that is incredible.
There's a couple of good points I want to make on that. One, walking, we need to get back into it, my wife and I, but we'll go for a walk, and we often, head out into the countryside, and it's just so peaceful. And we done one weekend, but part of it was by a busy kind of dual carriageway. It's just sort of down the bank.
Right.
And do you
So
know what? We were like so
Yeah.
stressed at the end of it.
Yeah.
It was like that wasn't relaxing at all.
No.
And even on with regards to exercising and working and muscles, I had a shoulder problem once because a lot of our work is forward, so we're sort of rubbing down or rolling out, using the fronts a lot.
Yeah.
And I had a terrible problem with my right shoulder. And I started to do some exercise from the gym where I was sort of pulling behind me and trying to build up my back a little bit more, and it seemed to correct it and line it up a bit better.
So that's the sort of thing I was talking about, isn't it? Getting that balance right. Exactly. So you've got to tick various boxes for exercise to be effective.
Okay.
If you're not enjoying, and even if you decide you're going to go to the gym as well as doing your job, if you don't like the gym, it's not going to be good for you, because if you're not enjoying it, it's stressful.
Yeah.
So whilst you're ticking the exercise box, you're not ticking the emotionally nourishing box or the happy box or whatever, and you're not going to keep doing it either.
Yeah.
So I'd much rather go and do something dance based or whatever than go in the gym. And that might be having a silly disco at home with my daughter. We don't do it so much now, she's getting older, but something like that, or going out somewhere that is part of your social life but is also exercise, or exercise can be so many things. But loving it, being able to do it regularly, and some of it being outside in a natural environment are the ideal.
There's a lot of bike riders in my group. I see them out on their bikes the weekend. So no, brilliant. I mean, Kate, I don't want to take any more of your time. I know
that's
you're very,
been lovely.
very busy. I really, really do appreciate your time and tons of valuable information. It's just a great way of looking at our lives and anxiety, and the impact on food and drink can have is incredible.
And let's call them simple, not necessarily easy. The simple things you can change to start making a big difference.
I'll be interested to see if anyone gives it a go, and like you say, start a simple diary, and even if it's stuff you don't want, like packet of crisps or chocolate bar, start ticking off how many days you're not having it, and then make it into a bit more, not a game, but give yourself a bit more influence.
That's it. And you can always swap it for an apple or something, can't you, or a banana or what have you. Take the thing out that ideally you'd have less of and put something good in to replace it.
Brilliant. Kate, I appreciate it again.
No, you're very welcome. Lovely to talk to you
again. You take care.
Yes, and you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.